Hey folks, this is Aestus from Aestus Guide, back again with another Baldur's Gate 3 video. In this video, we will be talking about all of the racial options available in the game, and we will be ranking them on a tier list as we do. So yeah, this is my race tier list, but I'm going to avoid calling it that because that's probably the cringiest combination of words I know of. It actually reminds me of this old clip.
Jenny, rank your favorite races in order.
What?
It's just a thought experiment, Jenny. No one will get mad at you.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm white, so white, and then I love Indian food, so maybe that would be two.
We were talking about World of Warcraft.
Just to be clear, this is a tier list of racial options in Baldur's Gate 3, alright? Okay, we're going to be going through these one by one and ranking them, starting with Elf. In fact, starting with High Elf. High Elves get a +2 bonus to Dexterity and Intelligence. Then they get some weapon proficiencies, a Perception proficiency, Dark Vision, and Fey Ancestry. We'll be going through all of these, starting with the attribute bonuses to Dexterity and Intelligence. And now is actually a good time to talk about attributes in character creation. If all of your attributes are at their lowest, you have 27 ability points to spend to buy yourself a starting stat line. You should think of these 27 points as 3 groups of 9, because 9 is the most that you can spend on a single stat. So the general patterns for spending these 27 points are to max 2 stats, and then spend the remaining 9 points on whatever is left of your attributes, or to go for a full max 3. That's a full min-maxing strategy where you have 3 max stats and then 3 min stats. Like I said, the max 2 is typically the best, except on some very multiple attribute dependent classes. Now, when you're spending your 9 points in a single stat, the first 5 that you spend will buy you a +1 increase for 1 point spent. That's for the first 5. For the remaining 4, the cost doubles, so it's 2 points spent for a +1 increase to the ability. For example, if we were buying Constitution, you can see 5 will buy us a 13, 22 remaining now, but if I bump this up to 14, you can see I've just spent 2 points on it. 15, another 2 points, that makes 9. I cannot raise Constitution any higher. When you have no bonus, as we've just seen, the thresholds are 13 before you have to spend double points, and 15 for max. When you have a +1 bonus, you can get to 14 before you're buying at increased cost, and then 16 will be your max. And then in stats where you have a +2 bonus, 15 before you're spending double points, and then 17 is the max. Now, by far, the +1 bonus is the least awkward, because you can see all of the thresholds land on an even. And even numbers in Baldur's Gate are the numbers that really matter. It's on even numbers that you get bonuses to your ability modifier, and that's really the important thing. So, when you have a +1 to a stat, like Elves have in Intelligence, you can get a 14 before you're spending at increased cost. 16 is max, 16 is a +3, and you cannot get a higher than +3 on any race in the game, because there are no races that get a +3 bonus to an attribute. +2 is the highest that you can get. By contrast, +2 bonuses are still good, but a little awkward, because you can see you can get to 15 before you're spending double cost. That's still a +2. And 17, that's still a +3. So what this means is that the difference between no bonus at all and a +1 bonus to an attribute is higher than the difference between a +1 and a +2. +2 is still the best, but it's not as big of an increase as the increase from +1 from no bonus at all. So I typically favor +1s, except in a few circumstances. These attributes are not all even. some attributes are stronger than others in a class neutral sense. Of course, which attribute is strongest is ultimately going to depend on your class, but in a class neutral sense, some of these still buy you better things than others. Now, sadly, since we're talking about high elves, dexterity is one of these stats that I think a +1 bonus to it is really good. A +2 bonus to it is still good, but, you know, you're fine just having the +1. And that's because dexterity as an attribute is in an awkward place where it's a mix between offense and defense. And as an offensive stat, it's not as good as strength. As a defensive stat, it's not as good as constitution. And so, for example, if you're a martial class, like a fighter, ranger, or rogue, you will likely prefer strength as your main stat. And if you're a caster class, and you're looking for that secondary stat that you want to invest in for defense, you'll want to invest in constitution before dexterity. That means dexterity in most builds sits in the awkward third attribute, the third most preferred attribute. I mean, you want a high dexterity, but it's not as important to max. And so I find in most of my builds, almost every build, I want a 14 dexterity. And as we've seen, a +1 is enough to buy a 14 dexterity without dipping into those increased costs. Of course, a +2 will also allow you to buy that 14 without dipping into increased costs, but you just prefer that +2 in a different attribute and the +1 in dexterity. So, that's just dexterity. Also, elves get a bonus to intelligence, which is good for wizards, but no other class. And in a class neutral sense, intelligence is the worst attribute in the game. All it really does is boost some skills, which all have mostly out of combat utility. And since this is an optimization video, in combat utility is preferred. So bonuses to intelligence, not great. Bonus to dexterity is good, but it's a +2 instead of a +1. We'd prefer that +2 somewhere else. The gist is that the attribute racial bonuses for high elves aren't great. But what about their proficiencies? High elves get proficiency in long swords, short swords, long bows, and short bows. These are good weapons, but with a few exceptions, weapon proficiencies are less desirable than armor proficiencies. Again, I'll just explain this really quickly. There are armor proficiencies, weapon proficiencies, and skill proficiencies, and of the three, armor is the most desirable. That's because it's very difficult to get even small increases to your armor class. And the big way is through proficiency in better types of armor. And if you're playing a class like a wizard or a sorcerer that gets no armor proficiencies at all, you really want your race to give you those proficiencies, right? By contrast, weapons, the difference between a simple weapon for damage and a martial weapon for damage it's present, but it's not significant. You know, you can get by with a dagger. It's really not that important to have a longsword instead of a dagger, for example. If you can use a longsword instead of a dagger, we'll take it, but it's really not a game changer like the armor is. Now, as I said, there are a few exceptions to this, and those exceptions are any weapon proficiency in a heavy weapon, because those allow you to utilize the Great Weapon Master feat, which is by far the most important feat for strikers, or a hand crossbow proficiency. And that's because hand crossbows are bugged right now so that they apply your dexterity ability modifier to the damage of your offhand attack. So effectively, you're getting the two-weapon fighting style for free if you dual-wield hand crossbows. It's a bug, I expect them to fix it, but for now, races that have proficiency in hand crossbows, that is actually a significant boost. I will say, though, longbow for high elves is good, because there's an awesome longbow in the game called Spell Thief. Spell Thief doesn't have any damage or accuracy boosts, but it does, once per short rest, return a level 1 spell slot to your character on a crit. And you can easily guarantee crits with spells like Sleep, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Hold Person, etc. But the thing is you don't really need longbow proficiency to use it. It's just that if you have longbow proficiency, you get your proficiency bonus to your attack rolls, and you can use it as a main weapon instead of, say, a cantrip on your wizard or your cleric. That is kind of nice for high elves who are probably going to be playing a caster class. But still, nothing to write home about for these weapon proficiencies. Perception proficiency is excellent. That's great. Perception is so valuable in this game, not for in combat. Well, even in combat, you can use it to spot stealth targets, technically. But out of combat, it does have a lot of utility, in, for example, spotting traps, and in spotting secrets that might give you gold, which you can use to buy better equipment, which will eventually help you in combat. So the 4 skill proficiencies that are really important are perception, stealth, athletics, and acrobatics, because those are the ones that will have the most impact in combat. So that's nice. Finally, let's talk about dark vision and Fey ancestry. Dark vision allows you to see in the dark up to 12 meters. 12 meters is really good for melee attacks, but it's easy to be outside of the range for ranged attacks. So yes, dark vision is very important. Without dark vision, in the many dark areas of this game, you will be attacking with disadvantage. So being able to completely bypass that within 12 meters, very, very useful. And then finally, Fey ancestry, also extremely useful. One of the best perks in the game. This gives you advantage on saving throws against being charmed, which you can just forget about. It's not that important. The big thing it gives you is that you cannot be put to sleep. I mean, the sleep spell never works on you. This is so valuable, especially for casters, because enemies in Baldur's Gate 3 will cast sleep on your low health targets. Casters like wizards and sorcerers are very often low health, and they often are using their concentration, and when they're put to sleep, it breaks concentration, no saving throw to resist. Being put to sleep is the number one way I drop concentration in my games, and Fey Ancestry completely guards against that. Do not overlook this. Fey Ancestry, incredible. Wow, I forgot to mention that High Elves get a cantrip. This seems really cool, but it's actually not that good. Some of the best cantrips are attack cantrips, and your attack cantrips that you get from being a high elf will always use your intelligence modifier. So unless you're one of the very few classes in the game that uses intelligence, it's probably going to be low, and so you're best off passing on these. That means your next best option is to pick a cantrip that's useful, but doesn't use your intelligence attribute. Blade Ward, Friends, Light, Minor Illusion, these are good options, and they're good cantrips, but it's not game-changing. I don't know how else to say it. It's just a nice boost, but not really that good in the grand scheme of things. So, all of that said, I give the High Elf a C tier, and this may surprise you, because we've talked about how great Dark Vision, Fey Ancestry, and Keen Senses are, but the thing is you can get these things on other racial options who also give you more. The bonuses that High Elves get besides these 3 just aren't that good. I'm mostly talking about their attribute bonuses and their cantrip. It really pigeonholes High Elves into a niche of intelligence using classes, and that is the Wizard, the Eldritch Knight, and the Arcane Trickster. Even with that said, there are other races that are better for these classes, so the High Elf is just in a weird spot where they're subpar as an option for almost every class. So that's C tier in my system. Now we'll move on to the Wood Elf. Wood Elves get all of the same base racial features that High Elves got. That's the +2 to Dexterity, Keen Senses, Dark Vision, Fey Ancestry, the weapon proficiencies, which we've all talked about. But then they add Fleet of Foot, which gives them an extra unit of movement, 1.5 meters or 5 feet, depending on which system of measurement you use. Mask of the Wild is proficiency in stealth, and instead of a +1 to intelligence, they gain a +1 to wisdom. Wisdom is an extremely valuable stat on almost every class, because your wisdom save will resist some of the most debilitating effects in the game. A +1 to wisdom is just always good, and it's especially good on the wisdom caster classes like druid or cleric. We talked about skill proficiencies. Stealth is one of the most valuable, in fact, I would say probably the most valuable combat skill in the game. So with a Wood Elf selection, you're getting proficiency in stealth and in perception. So good. These are skills you will use all the time. And then they'll gain an extra unit in movement speed. I love this. You cannot attack an enemy if they're out of range, and an enemy can't attack you if you're out of range. I use movement all the time. Now, it has come to my attention, though, that this is a matter of playstyle. I value movement very highly. Many other people I have spoken to don't value it as much. So your mileage may vary, but I have to give you my opinion on this. I rank the Wood Elf in A tier. They make some of the best clerics in the game, they make some of the best druids in the game, and then they're a good option for pretty much everything else. A tier. Next up is the Tiefling. For their base racial features, all Tieflings will get Hellish Resistance, which is resistance to fire damage, and also Dark Vision up to 12 meters. The Osmodeus Tiefling will also get a +1 to Intelligence and a +2 to Charisma, as well as a unique portfolio of spells and cantrips. At level 1, they get the Thaumaturgy cantrip, as we see here. By level 3, they will get Hellish Rebuke, which they can cast once per long rest. Hellish Resistance and Dark Vision are great. Honestly, Fire is probably the second most common damage type in the game, so having resistance to it, that's having the damage, is fantastic. And Dark Vision, we've talked about it, really useful to have. It saves you from getting disadvantage on attacks in the many dark areas of this game. Sadly, what really holds Osmodeus Tieflings back are their attribute bonuses. Intelligence and Charisma are, in my opinion, the two worst attributes in the game from a class-neutral perspective. Obviously, if you're playing a wizard, or if you're playing bard or warlock or sorcerer, then Charisma and Intelligence can be really good. But that only really suits the Osmodeus Tiefling for those classes. And how I rank the races is how well they do in a wide variety of classes, and the Osmodeus Tiefling just doesn't do that great. Also, there are better races for both Wizard and Intelligence and in Bard, Warlock, and Sorcerer as well. Osmodeus Tieflings aren't saved by their spells and cantrips either. Thaumaturgy is nice, but has no real in-combat utility. Hellish Rebuke is a A-tier spell in my book, but having one per long rest just isn't going to make a difference. So, in the end, I rank the Osmodeus Tiefling a C tier. Good for Charisma classes, and decent for Wizard, but still not the best at those things, and then pretty much terrible at everything else is C tier. Next up is the Mephistopheles Tiefling. Mephistopheles Tiefling also get a +1 to Intelligence and a +2 to Charisma. The only difference between them and Osmodeus Tiefling is their cantrips and spell portfolio. Mephistopheles Tieflings get Mage Hand at level 1 and Burning Hands at level 3. Burning Hands can be useful for proccing the Circlet of Fire. It's the only guaranteed source of fire damage in the game right now, but again, you only get one cast per long rest, and being able to guarantee proc Circlet of Fire one time per long rest is not that good. And then besides that, it's everything we said about the Osmodeus Tiefling. So they're practically the same race, and that means they deserve the same ranking. It's C tier. When we get to the Zarya Tiefling, though, we actually do get to see some differences. Zarya Tieflings get +2 to Charisma and +1 to Strength. And of course, they also get their own cantrips and spells. At level 1, they learn Thaumaturgy. At level 3, they learn Branding Smite, but it's a unique version of Branding Smite that's automatically upcast as a level 2 spell for some reason, which doesn't make it great, but definitely makes it better. Branding Smite is interesting because it is cast on an attack, which makes it practically free as far as your action economy goes, and can also proc Circle of Fire, but again, it's just once per long rest. The thing that really saves this class is the +1 to Strength, which makes it the best class when you're playing a charisma-based caster that you also want strength on, which is not uncommon. For example, if you're playing a College of Valor Bard, Zarya Tieflings make one of the best College of Valor Bards in the game. And when we get Paladins, Zarya Tieflings are going to really stand out in that class as well. This unique attribute bonus combo, along with Hellish Resistance and Dark Vision, fantastic features, set this race apart, earning it a B tier from me. Next up is Drow. Drow are a type of elf, and so their abilities overlap a lot with High Elves or Wood Elves. They get Keen Senses, they gain Fey Ancestry, they gain Dark Vision, but they actually get Superior Dark Vision. That doubles the distance of Dark Vision, which really, really benefits. Now you can use ranged weapons at their max range in the dark without attacking with disadvantage. And with proper movement, you can outrange other enemies with Dark Vision so that they're attacking you with disadvantage, whereas you're attacking them normally. Fantastic. Not very many races get Superior Dark Vision. Drow is one of them, and it's really good. For their attribute bonuses, they gain a +2 to Dexterity and a +1 to Charisma. Now, we've talked about Dexterity. It's good, but we'd rather the +2 being somewhere else. +1 to Charisma isn't great, but this kind of solidifies the Drow in the spot of being a really good ranged Warlock. Charisma is, of course, very good on Warlocks. They are Charisma casters. Dexterity is going to help you with stealth rolls and ranged attack rolls. And then they have the Superior Dark Vision to outrange enemies with even normal Dark Vision. It's good. It's really good. Then they get these awesome weapon proficiencies. Rapier, Short Sword, and here it is, Hand Crossbow. We talked about Hand Crossbow as being kind of unique as far as weapon proficiencies go, because you can dual wield Hand Crossbows, and you get to add your Dexterity modifier to the damage on your offhand attack. And then Fey Ancestry, just pretty much everything here is amazing, except Dexterity and Charisma. We could have better bonuses, but these do give the Drow a really interesting niche. So altogether, I give the Drow an A tier. They make great Charisma casters and any kind of ranged striker. Next up is Human. Humans are very easy to cover. They're kind of the vanilla race in D&D and Baldur's Gate 3. Humans get a +1 to every single attribute. That's a +6 to attributes in total, which is almost double what most other racial options will get. And as I was saying, +1 is pretty good. A difference between no bonus and a +1 is significant. However, just getting attribute bonuses and nothing else really holds humans back, but they're also pretty good at pretty much every class in the game, and that's them a solid B tier for me. Next up is Githyanki. Githyanki get a +1 to Intelligence, +2 to Strength, Light and Medium Armor proficiency, as well as short sword, long sword, and great sword. I absolutely love Githyanki. They get so many incredible things. Let's go through them. +1 intelligence is nice if you are playing Arcane Trickster, Eldritch Knight, or Wizard, but pretty much useless on anything else. Not the best bonus, but the +2 to strength, now we're talking. I consider strength the most valuable attribute in this game because it affects shoves, it allows you to resist shoves, it affects carry weight, jump distance, and also attacks. All of these things are so important in Baldur's Gate 3, so getting a +2 bonus to strength, amazing. Then, to follow that up, Githyanki get light and medium armor proficiency, which is all the proficiencies you need. This allows you to play a wizard with your +1 intelligence and still use the best armors in the game. And then on top of that, they get all of the sword proficiencies. Long sword, short sword, and here's the important one, great sword. When we were talking about weapon proficiencies earlier, I said that most weapon proficiencies don't matter except for hand crossbows or any kind of heavy weapon. And Githyanki are actually the only race available so far that get proficiency in a heavy weapon, and that's great swords, allowing them to take and use Great Weapon Master on any class. Rogue, Wizard, Sorcerer, Warlock, you can use a great sword with Great Weapon Master on all of them. So Githyanki automatically become amazing strikers. They have the best armor proficiency in the game, and a +2 to the best stat in the game. It really is a class that is good at both being a wizard or being any of the strikers. It's good as a wizard because you want these weapon and armor proficiencies as a wizard. It's good at being a striker, like say a fighter. Even though you don't use these weapon and armor proficiencies, you're still getting that extremely valuable +2 to strength. Oh, and I almost forgot. Githyanki also gets spells. They get a spell portfolio just like the Tieflings or the Drow. They don't show it here for some reason, but at level 1, Githyankis get access to the Mage Hand cantrip, a decent cantrip, but not really useful in combat. At level 3, they get once per long rest the jump spell, and this is actually really, really good. The way jump functions in Baldur's Gate 3 is it's a significant boost to your mobility. It triples your jump distance, and you can jump on a bonus action. And then, what also increases your jump distance is strength. So Githyanki have a high strength, and then they can triple that a boosted jump with the jump spell, giving them insane mobility. Now, in a lot of fights you don't need this, but there are some fights with significant obstacles where jumping is important. For example, jumping up a cliff, jumping from rooftop to rooftop, chasing a harpy from cliffside to cliffside, you get the idea. And so having jump once per long rest is actually good. It's the kind of spell which you'll only really need once per long rest, but it's very impactful once per long rest. So Githyanki are the first S-tier race in my books. They're good at pretty much everything. There isn't a class in the game that Githyanki isn't fantastic at, so enjoy them. Alright, Dwarf. The base racial feature for Dwarves is a +2 to Constitution, Dwarven Resilience, some weapon proficiencies, and Dark Vision. And then we're covering the Gold Dwarf here, which also gets +1 to Wisdom and Dwarven Toughness. Alright, let's start out with attribute bonuses. +2 to Constitution is so good. Every class in the game needs hit points, and will use hit points. So a +2 to Constitution is beneficial for every single class in the game. And then it's especially beneficial for any caster class that is going to be using their concentration spell slot, which should be most anybody. You really want to use your concentration slot. If you don't use it, it's a whole piece of your action economy that you're wasting. So, again, every character wants Constitution. It's probably the second most valuable attribute in the game, in my opinion, and a +2 bonus to it is extremely valuable. Dwarven Resilience gives you advantage on saving throws against poison, as well as resistance to poison damage. Again, incredible. I said that fire was the second most common damage type. Poison is the most common damage type in my runs. There's just so many enemies in this game that you do poison damage, whether it's spiders. There are certain fey creatures which will do a ton of poison damage. All kinds of creatures will be dipping their weapons in poison. You get the idea. Having resistance to that damage is great. And the combination of Dwarven Resilience and the +2 Constitution just makes your Dwarf tanky. It doesn't matter what class you pick, they're just going to be fairly tanky, and that's really great. It never hurts to have characters that can take a hit. Now, the weapon proficiencies, Battle Axe, Hand Axe, Light Hammer, Warhammer, not as good. These are primarily strength-based weapons, so you do want to be going strength on your dwarves. They are good for, classes that don't get martial weapon proficiencies, and there is an S-tier Warhammer in the game. But, again, as I've been saying, most weapon proficiencies aren't that big of a boost from what you get if you were just using a dagger or a quarterstaff or a club. So, nice, but not crazy. And then they get dark vision at 12 meters. It's good. We've talked about it many times. That's a good feature. To the Gold Dwarf sub-race, +1 to wisdom. Again, so good. I've said wisdom is the third best attribute because it is what allows you to resist some of the most debilitating effects on the game. Again, this is another boost to your tankiness. So with wisdom, constitution, dwarven resilience, you get the picture. On top of all of that, gold dwarves get dwarven toughness, which increases their hit points by 1 per level. It's kind of like having a +2 to constitution, except it doesn't affect your constitution saving throws. It just boosts your hit points. But still, this puts them well ahead of the curve on hit points. And hit points are the best form of durability in Baldur's Gate 3. So, add all of this together. Gold dwarves are just absolute units. They're so resilient, and it never hurts to be resilient. The problem is that they're just not adding much else other than resilience. If you play as a cleric or a druid, this +1 to wisdom will help with your spells, but that's all you're getting. No bonuses to strength or dexterity, which means they're always going to be a little bit behind the curve when it comes to striking. Group all of this together, it's just... I want to give it an A tier, and in earlier versions of this game, I did give it an A tier. But in the end, I've landed on B. I just want to say it's a high B. Being tanky is good, but in the end, offense is better than defense. So it's B tier for Gold Dwarf. Next up is Shield Dwarf. Shield Dwarfs, of course, get all of the base racial features that Gold Dwarves got, but then they add +2 to strength, and then light and medium armor proficiency. Holy crap, this is so good. First off, they're the only racial option that gets 2 +2s. I've talked a bit about why +2s aren't that good, but when you have 2 of them, they actually get really good, because it allows you to, when you max 2 stats, which is the common way of distributing stats at level 1, you can max strength and constitution, and then at level 4, split your ASI to get 18 in both of these stats. And it's the only class without the help of certain items in the game, which I won't spoil, that can do this. Get an 18 or higher in two primary stats. And the fact that these 2 primary stats are strength and constitution, the 2 best stats in the game and the most versatile stats in the game, it means shield dwarves are good on any class. Then, of course, they get light and medium armor. We talked about this with the Githyanki, but this is so good. They're getting all of these incredible tanky benefits. Then they're getting an offensive boost on top of it, +2 strength. That's also a mobility boost, by the way. It's S tier. Shield Dwarves are absolutely S tier, one of the best races in the game by far. Although, I just remembered I've forgotten to point out that they have a base racial speed of 7.5 meters, which is 1 movement unit less than the standard. That does hurt the Gold Dwarf, but the Shield Dwarf, because of this +2 strength, they're going to be able to offset the movement speed penalty by being able to jump really far. That jump's going to make them move just as far or farther than a lot of your standard movement units. So there really is no downside for the Shield Dwarf. Absolutely incredible. They make great casters because of their constitution and armor proficiencies. They make great strikers because of their strength boost. Fantastic. Can't say enough good things about Shield Dwarves, one of my favorite races by far. Let's move on now to Half-Elves. Okay, Half-Elves. There are 3 sub-races for Half-Elves. All of them get this very interesting kind of attribute bonus. They're going to get a +2 to Charisma automatically, but then a +1 to 2 stats of your choice. I often, of course, recommend strength and constitution, but it's your choice, and that's the point. They also get Dark Vision, 12 meters, and Fey Ancestry, which we've talked about many times before, both great features, especially Fey Ancestry. And then the Drow Half-Elf sub-race is going to get the Drow's racial spell portfolio. So that is Dancing Lights at level 1, as we can see, and then Fairy Fire at level 3. Automatically getting bonuses to +2 bonus to Charisma and +1 to the attributes of your choice is just so good. And with Fey Ancestry, so good. These cantrips, Dancing Lights and Fairy Fire, are good support cantrips for your allies. And they also work for you because even though you have Dark Vision, it is a limited range. This makes the Drow Half-Elf an A tier for me. Next up is the High Half-Elf, which gets all the things we talked about with Half-Elves in general, but then they get a High Elf cantrip of your choice. They probably deserve an A tier, but it's just so disappointing to me because the Drow Half-Elf gets a cantrip and then 2 spells. And all the High Half-Elves getting a cantrip. Sure, you get to choose it, but there isn't that much to choose from. They're just not that good, and it suffers from the problem of using your intelligence, which we talked about with the High Elf. So, I mean, it probably deserves an A tier just from these, but I don't know why you would pick the High Half-Elf over the other Half-Elf variants. It's a B tier for me. Finally, the Wood Half-Elf. Besides all the things we talked about with Half-Elves, they gain Fleet of Foot, that's an extra unit of movement, and Mask of the Wild, which is proficiency in stealth. All of these things are useful in every single class, and there's just so much to it. They're great casters because of Fey Ancestry. They can be any class you want with a +2 bonus. And they make fantastic Charisma casters, Bard, Sorcerers, Warlock, all of them so good. And then they're gaining extra movement and a stealth proficiency on top of it. It's S tier, and this is the last S tier race that we're going to cover. That makes the S tiers in my book is Wood Half-Elf, Shield Dwarf, and Githyanki. Alright, now we are at Halflings, one of my personal favorites, just because I like them, not because they're actually that good. There are 2 variations of Halfling, that's Lightfoot and Strongheart. Both will get a +2 to Dexterity, the Brave feature, and the Lucky feature. So let's talk about these. +2 Dexterity, of course, we've talked about it many times. Brave gives you advantage on saving throws against being frightened, which used to be a super debilitating condition, but now is just kind of average. But resisting it is nice, and advantage on saving throws is a significant boost. Still, it's really niche. You don't face frightened rolls very much so far in the game. Lucky is actually really good. I gotta hand it to Halflings on this one. When you roll a 1 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. Now, if you add up how much this actually gains, It's not much. It's between a +1 and a +2 bonus to your d20 rolls in general. But the fact that it's allowing you to avoid a critical miss is so crucial, because there aren't ways of increasing your accuracy beyond 95% except for this ability, Lucky. And technically it stacks with advantage. If you have advantage on the attack roll, you already have a 1 in 400 chance of rolling 2 1s. But then you get to re-roll both of those 1s, getting another 1 in 400 chance for each. You can do the math. When you're attacking with advantage, your chances of rolling a critical miss with a halfling are astronomically high. And so halflings avoid critical misses, which is actually super good. Lightfoot halflings also gain the naturally stealthy feature, which gives them proficiency in stealth checks. Awesome. Wood elves and half wood elves also get this. We talked about it. Really good. They gain a base racial speed of 7.5 meters. Actually, both halflings will. That's 1 less than usual, so it's a negative for their movement speed. And then they gain a +1 to charisma. Okay, so the problem with Lightfoot halfling is that the combination of bonuses to charisma and dexterity is already shared by so many other classes. For example, it could be shared by high elf, technically human, but most importantly, Drow, right? And Drow are just better at all of the dexterity and charisma classes than Lightfoot halflings are. So that is a real knock against it. Still, Lucky and Brave are interesting enough to get Lightfoot halfling a C tier for me. Strongheart halfling gets all of the base features of a halfling, but then adds Strongheart resilience, that is advantage on saving throws against poison and resistant to poison damage, the same thing that dwarves get. We talked about with the dwarves, this is really good because poison is the most common damage type. And then they also get a +1 to constitution. And now this is interesting. They're the only class in the game besides half-elves or humans which get bonuses to both dexterity and constitution, which are 2 extremely strong defensive stats. Combined with that, Strongheart resilience and Lucky for ability checks and saving throws, and Brave advantage on being saving throws to be frightened, you get a fairly tanky racial option. And it's one that actually uses dexterity as its striking stat rather than strength, which the dwarves get, kind of solidifying its niche as the dexterity tank. I like that. It gives it a nice spot. I play Strongheart halflings all the time. It's a B tier ranking for them. And that leaves us with the last race, the one just introduced in patch 8, the Gnome. There are 3 sub-races of gnomes. Their base race features, their base racial feature, are a slow movement speed, that's 7.5 meters per turn, a +2 to intelligence, and gnome cunning, a feature which gives you advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. The rock gnome also gets a +1 to constitution, dark vision, and artificer's lore that allows you to add twice your proficiency bonus to history checks, which is interesting. It really means you'll succeed on your history checks. But history checks really have no direct combat utility, so it's a useful role-playing ability, but we won't really consider it much as far as optimization goes. Dark vision we've talked about. The +2 bonus to intelligence and constitution is interesting because it makes them a good intelligence caster and gives them that constitution they need to make their concentration saves. It's a good bonus, but really, as we've said before, intelligence isn't a good stat. It's not versatile. There aren't many classes that use it, and on classes that don't use it, it's practically useless. So the big thing that you're getting from the rock gnome is gnome cunning. Advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. That's actually really good, particularly the wisdom saving throws. Getting advantage on those can be an absolute game changer. Intelligence and charisma, not as much, but still, there are some things that target these attributes, and having advantage on those saving throws is just nice. Altogether, this is a very resilient subrace, and it doesn't really compete as well with the other big resilient subraces, but I could definitely see you preferring advantage on these saving throws over some of the other defensive bonuses from, say, the Dwarf, on classes like maybe the Barbarian that already has so many resistances and hit points anyways. It gives the Rock Gnome an interesting niche. I'll give it a B tier. Next up is the Deep Gnome. Deep Gnomes get, besides what we've already talked about, a +1 to Dexterity, superior Dark Vision, and the stone camouflage feature, which is advantage on stealth checks. All the same things we said about the Rock Gnome apply here when it comes to Gnome Cunning and the +2 to Intelligence. +1 to Dexterity is great, as we talked about. It allows you to get that 14 Dexterity without dipping into the double cost on your point buy. Superior Dark Vision, also incredible, and it's so hard to get. Deep Gnomes give it to you, allowing you to build a darkness range build really well, and then advantage on stealth checks on top of that. This makes them great abusers of ranged combat, because in ranged combat you are often wanting to stealth at a distance in the dark to guarantee advantage on your attacks. They're perfect for that, and then as well good for being an intelligence caster. If this was a +2 in something other than intelligence, I would be giving them a much higher ranking. They probably deserve a B tier, but I still think they're the best gnome, and so I'll give them an A tier ranking, but it's probably a low A tier. And then finally we have the Forest Gnome, which gets +1 to Dexterity, standard Dark Vision, and then the Speak with Animals spell, which has no combat utility that I know of. It's a completely role-playing spell, so we can disregard it. It's just a worse version of the Deep Gnome. The Deep Gnome gets all the same things, except a better Dark Vision and an actual useful skill check instead of the role-playing Speak with Animals, which means there's really no reason to pick the Forest Gnome unless you just want to play a Forest Gnome for role-playing reasons. The Deep Gnome is always better, so that gives it the very unique RP tier, the only RP tier race in the game right now, and that covers all of the races. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Getting really close to that 1K subs. Can't wait. I'll catch you next time.